was firing them? What was the fuel?
Well, the fuel was oil. It was fed from the top. It dropped a drop of oil down onto the plate. It was a hot plate, and it fired out, and it just built up its heat on that there,
But prior to that, was it not coal, or was that the brickyards?
The German never was coal.
Yeah, but the other kilns,
The oil chambers were all, whenever I first started, were all fired with coal, and the beehive kilns were all fired with coal. And a lorry went out with its delivery in the morning, it'd come back with a load of coal in the evening, and they were heeled up round the yard, and men distributed them out round the different fire holes, and the burners fed it into the fires, God, there was some coal used at that time in the yard. You can imagine all that, the smoke, the smoke from and especially whenever the salt of the kiln, the fed salt into the fire to put the glaze on the pipes, and when a kiln was being salted, you could hardly have seen the kiln with smoke, and as I said, there was the fumes from the kilns, there was the duct house, there was, how many chimneys was there? 1, 2, 3. There must have been about 7 chimneys.
all belching out smoke and
All belching out
pollution.
smoke and pollution, Like, it was...
But the other side of the yards too, Mickey, just from the human point of view, like, you say there's in the region of 300 in it at its prime. There had to be a big array of characters, because of the whole nature of work. I know there's a lot of slagging and on around the yards and all, but there had to be quite a few characters, worked in it.
There was, like, the work was hard in the yard, but really and truly, the men that worked in the yard they were a delight. I looked forward to going down to my work in the mornings because the crack was good, and like as you said, there was characters in it that, there was pranks being played every day of the week on somebody, You never knew, you really didn't know when somebody was serious, Everybody was up for the lark, and I enjoyed it, I have to say, I really did enjoy it,
But also, again, just to paint a picture of the times, whenever you were first starting all the yard, the vast majority of people would have been coming from every direction into the town on bicycles.
Oh God, aye. There was bicycles, everywhere around the yard, and the same thing, there was no flasks in that time, like there was no fancy flasks or any of that sort of stuff. A man come in the morning with a milk bottle full of tea, and it was put in the wicket of the kiln, and there instead there was enough heat in the doorway of the kiln for to keep the tea warm.
I remember men burying it down in the sand in the kiln, or not really the
That's
sand,
right,
the dust in the kiln, and about halfway down, and then come tea time they lifted it out, it was lovely and warm.
It was kept warm. It was a flask in its own right, But everybody carried their tea in a milk bottle at that time. Sometimes I wondered, did Killyman not run short of bottles? But Killyman, by the way, was the creamery, the local creamery at that time. But no, like, even the lunches, like, good God, if I made it, like, some of the lunches, unbelievable. But whenever you'd have took it out of your pocket at lunchtime, you'd have thought it was a week old. It was that hard. But
as you say, everybody was in the same. There was no difference. Everybody was the same boat.
Everybody was in the same boat.
What was the starting time?
Starting time was 8 o'clock in the morning.
Finishing.
There was a 3-minute horn blew. Horn blew, and that was your first call. On your second call, 8 o'clock, you had to be in position.
At your station.
You had to be in your station.
And then you finished at what? 5, 6, 5?
5:30, and then gradually it come around to 5 o'clock,
But over the years then, like you were there such a long time, was there, I remember even a few disputes and things, but was there significant improvement in pay and conditions then over the years?
There was. There's no doubt about it. The pay wasn't all that wonderful at the start. Now, whenever I got married, I was getting £11.05 a week. You know, and like, I would say at that time maybe that I was in one of the better paid jobs in the yard. I was on the gully machine, you know, and we were in piecework. We were earning our own money, you know, and I'd have said I was rightly paid at that, you know. But bit by bit and gradually it started to increase. Conditions started to increase. You would have got time and a quarter, you'd have got piecework rates, you'd have got fall back rates if your machine broke, you know, or something which left you couldn't achieve your day's piecework, you know. You had a fall back rate which was more or less a safety net, you know, for your day's pay for the week, you know. Things like that there, you know, and you got annual increases then, you know, and it wouldn't have been maybe much, maybe sixpence or 1 and 6 pence, you know, which was what, about 7.5p maybe, you know. But as I say, gradually it all built up and become a good enough paying place. A lot of families reared out of the yard, you know.
That's right.
And a hell of a lot of families.
And holidays?
Holidays were, well, at that time you had Christmas Day and Boxing Day. You would have had Easter Monday and Tuesday, and you would have had I think maybe at that time it might have been, it was a little over a week in July, and that was it around to Christmas again, you know. You weren't spoiled with holidays, but like, you know, whenever that all finished up, like we had good holidays, you know, and good rates, you know. There was no doubt about that. Especially whenever it come under local hands again. I have great faith in local industry.
Well, who owned it whenever, way back in the day then? And you're saying local industry, right? But before Sheedle and before
Well,
who was the owner?
Well, whenever I came in, it was SK Pipes, Stewart and Kelly. That was the stamp on the pipe at that time, SK, and it changed from that to Hepworth. No, it went into Hepworth hands. They were an English company too. Well, they didn't hang about too long either, like, you know, but it fell back into local hands again, and it was Ulster Fireclare Works then at that time, you know.
And that was a group of local people who had shares in it, or what?
No, Ulster Fireclare Works probably was, you know.
I remember Ken Michael Gorham was one of the directors at one time. He worked
And
in it as well.
Ted Harris was a big man in it at that time too, you know. But it was still recognised as being local, you know. And as I said, like, you know, there wouldn't have been a savage on cutbacks and things as what the foreign industry was.
With them, you're just a number, like, aren't you?
You were just a number, that's all you were. You were just a number, like, you know. They weren't concerned about who you were, what you were, or how long you were there, you know.
Yeah.
But that is more or less it.
But it was, you know, you're describing the sulphur and all, it really was, at the same time, you know, you wouldn't get too starry-eyed about it. It was tough. I mean, the conditions were primitive, basically.
Our conditions were primitive. There's no doubt about that. Like, you know, there was really very little